In the quiet suburban neighborhoods of California in the 1970s, a shadow moved unseen, a predator who terrorized the state for over a decade, his true identity shrouded in mystery. His name is now known to many, the Golden State Killer, a man who was both cunning and cold, a killer who evaded capture for years, leaving behind a trail of unspeakable crimes, but never the answers the victim's family so desperately sought. This is the story of the Golden State Killer, his violent reign, his methodical approach to terror, and the painstaking investigation that finally brought justice decades later. A story of fear, of darkness, of a killer who was once thought to be untouchable. Today we'll walk through the chilling events that spanned the late 1960s to the 1980s. From the early break-ins to the brutal attacks that left an entire community living in fear. The East Area Rapist. The early years. The story begins in 1976 when a quiet suburban community in Sacramento, California was rocked by a series of disturbing events. The first attack, which would later be attributed to the Golden State Killer, was different from what we would come to expect. A series of home invasions, each more terrifying than the last. The early crimes were carried out under the cover of darkness. The first victims were often targeted while they slept. In many cases, the man would break into their homes, blindfold the couple, and then bind them together, taking his time to terrorize his victims. One of the earliest reported victims was a young couple in their Sacramento home, who were awakened in the dead of night by a stranger's voice, a voice so calm it made the attack even more chilling. The intruder ordered them to face the wall and tied them up with shoelaces before ransacking their home, but the terror didn't stop at simple robbery. The intruder escalated his violence, and soon, these home invasions turned into brutal rapes. The victims were always chosen in the most disturbing way. They were ordinary people, living their everyday lives, completely unaware that they were being stalked. The Golden State Killer, then known as the East Area Rapist, would go on to assault dozens of women, often in the same area, over the span of several years. The attacks were violent and methodical, often involving restraints, threats of violence, and always taking place in the dead of night. But his method was consistent. He would break into the homes of couples, tie them up, and then after his violent assault, he would leave, disappearing without a trace. The escalation from rapist to killer. As the years went on, the East Area Rapist crimes began to escalate. What had started as an assault and burglary evolved into something far more sinister. In 1978, in the small, quiet town of Visalia, the escalation began to show itself in the most horrific way: a murder. This was the moment the killer's evolution into a true predator began. The first known murder attributed to him occurred on February 2nd, 1978, when Brian and Katie Maggiore, a young couple in their early 20s, were walking their dog near their home. They were ambushed by an attacker who shot them both dead in cold blood. The attack was swift, brutal, and deliberate, an execution-style murder that sent shockwaves through the community. What made the attack even more chilling was the fact that it seemed completely random. No robbery, no signs of struggle, just the bodies of two innocent people left in the middle of the night. The killer was beginning to make his transition from the East Area Rapist to something far darker, a true murderer, a killer with no fear and no hesitation. The Night Stalker, the Bay Area Murders. By 1979, the killer's reign of terror had expanded beyond the borders of Sacramento. He had become the Night Stalker, a name that would come to symbolize fear throughout the entire Bay Area. The murders began to pile up, each more brutal than the last. The investigations and the police response. As the killer's crimes spread across California, the police struggled to piece together any significant leads. Investigators linked the crimes through the victims' descriptions. Small details like the size and build of the suspect and his calm demeanor during the assaults. But they had little else to go on. The killer seemed to know exactly how to avoid leaving evidence behind, and he never stayed in one place long enough to be caught. Police followed every lead, but nothing connected the dots until in 1986, the killing stopped and the investigation went cold. In the years that followed, the case became a legend, a haunting, unsolved mystery. The name East Area Rapist was forgotten, replaced by the more ominous title, Golden State Killer. The DNA breakthrough, the cold case reopens. Fast forward to 2001. The investigation had long since gone cold, but there were still those who refused to let the case be forgotten. The Golden State Killer's legacy remained in the minds of victims' families, and cold case investigators continued to work, hoping for a break. In 2001, advancements in DNA technology gave the case new life. Investigators began revisiting old evidence, looking for traces of DNA that had previously been overlooked. Then, in 2018, a breakthrough came when police used genetic genealogy to match DNA found at crime scenes to a distant relative of the killer. This breakthrough led investigators to Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer living in Sacramento, who was arrested in April 2018. DeAngelo's arrest marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. The Golden State Killer, who had evaded capture for over 40 years, was finally unmasked. DNA had been the key to solving the case, and it brought an end to the reign of terror that had gripped California for so long. The story of the Golden State Killer is one of brutality and horror, but also of perseverance. Thanks to the work of dedicated investigators, victims' families, and the breakthroughs of modern forensic science, justice was finally served. Joseph James DeAngelo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The legacy of the Golden State Killer, however, lives on, not only in the memories of his victims, but also in the way we approach justice. It is a chilling reminder that even the most elusive of killers can be caught, but it's a painful reminder, too, of the darkness that can exist in the most unexpected places. Thank you for joining me as we explored the terrifying true story of the Golden State Killer.